Hello everyone, welcome to the LGBTQ plus journalism network's very first event. This panel event is looking at why LGBTQ plus journalism is important in 2022. So we have an absolutely fantastic panel here who are going to talk about their experiences, their work, and obviously hopefully give some advice to people who are looking to get into this type of journalism. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I'll go across my screen like that. So let's start with Charlotte. If you can just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Charlotte. My pronouns are she, her. And I founded a platform called Unite UK. Basically, we just share LGBTQ plus stories around the world. And it's something that I do alongside some freelance writers who are all LGBTQ plus. And it's just really a space to share stories and just enjoy being queer, I guess. Yeah.
Brilliant. Jamie, we'll jump to yourself next.
Thanks. I'm Jamie Wareham. I've been a journalist for about 8 years now. I've done kind of video, audio, and words all over the place, including 4 years for what it's worth in gay media, including at Gay Star News and Attitude. And I write for Forbes now, and recently launched Queer AF, my podcast, as a community interest company. And now we're writing a newsletter that commissions underrepresented queer folk with the hope of building their craft in Korea.
Brilliant. Ryan?
Hello, I'm Ryan. My pronouns are he, him. I currently run the editorial team at Pink News, but I've been a journalist for far too long, nearly 14 years, I think. Sounds bad when you say it out loud. And about more than half of that, I think, has been spent doing in LGBT media. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. And then last but by certainly not least, Shivani.
Hi, I'm Shivani, or Shiv, my pronouns are they, them, and I am a journalist and broadcaster. I've worked for the BBC, The Guardian, Reuters, Virgin Radio, a whole bunch of places, and yeah, do a range of things as well, not just LGBTQ plus journalism. I do science journalism and general news as well. But I think the skills as an LGBTQ plus journalist are transferable to those topics.
Brilliant. Right, so we'll dive into our first kind of topic. So I posed this to the panel. What is the proudest LGBTQ plus story you've told, and what was the result of telling that story? I thought it was important to start with this one because I understand that a lot of people who are attending tonight are early career journalists or looking to become journalists, and so it's always good to see, you know, the achievements that people have done and understand how they got there. So if anyone wants to jump in first, what's the proudest story you've told, and what was the result of telling that story? Whoever wants to go first.
I can cheat a little bit. It's not one story, it's a whole collection of stories. I made a podcast called The Logbooks, which is sharing untold stories or sort of censored stories of British LGBTQ plus history through the archives of the LGBTQ plus helpline called Switchboard. So they would take a note down of a lot of the calls that they received over the years. And it was a way for us to track the struggles and the celebrations that this community has had over the last 50 odd years. So making that podcast was the best thing I've done. It was a pure labor of love. It was completely independent as well, and Jamie has said that it's amazing, thank you. It was purely independent as well. It was important to us to be independent so that we could make sure that there was no external reason for why we should or shouldn't include a particular story or censor those voices in a particular way. And I don't know if it's done anything in terms of, I know people have written articles and that's changed laws and stuff like that. I don't know if it's done anything on that grand scale, but it's found a community, and we have people reaching out to us all the time. And the podcast is finished now, and we still get people reaching out saying how much it touched them or moved them or affected them in one way or another. The comments on the podcast sort of say that people are laughing and crying while listening to it, and hopefully sometimes crying with laughter. That's the most important story I've been able to be privileged in being part of telling.
That sounds absolutely incredible. Just very quickly, everyone who's a guest here today, I forgot to say before we got started, I was too excited. If you have a question for any of the panelists, we're going to do questions at the end. Pop them in the chat. So put question, and then, for example, if you have a question for Shivani or just generally, pop question for so and so or general question, and then what it is, and we can get to it at the end. But that sounds like an absolutely brilliant podcast series. Do you think that kind of the reception of it, Shivani, from being a very positive reception, was because LGBTQ plus journalism a lot of the time comes down to the fact it is community? People want to read stories that relate to them.
I don't think that that's what happened here. I think what it was people were hearing stories of similar stories to their own lives and things that they hadn't heard before, things that they were growing up feeling like there was nobody else out there who was experiencing similar things to them. And through this podcast, you know, however many years later, it might be 30, 40, 50 years later, they're now finding out that there are people who had very similar, if not exactly the same experiences as they did, and that they weren't alone and that they aren't alone. And on the flip side, we're receiving messages from people who are sort of straight allies or straight teachers or whoever, and they're saying that they learned so much through the podcast because there's been such a period of time where, even though Section 28 has ended, which was a clause brought in by Margaret Thatcher 34 years ago that meant that you couldn't teach about LGBTQ plus lifestyles in schools or in any public authority environment, meaning libraries as well. People have said that they've learned so much that they weren't aware of some of the struggles that our community was going through. Obviously, a lot of those struggles involved and was around the HIV/AIDS crisis, which is something that we are learning more and more about and seeing on mainstream media more and more, which is great. But there have also been lots of other things like custody battles and starting families and being out at school during something like Section 28, finding nightlife before the internet existed, finding a gay bar before you could Google it. And it's an insight into a world that I don't think anybody else has really told that story in that same way.
Brilliant. I mean, if you want to drop a link to it in the chat, or that goes for any of our panelists, if you want to drop a link to any of your work, feel free to flag it to the people who are here today. Let's jump to someone else. So anyone else of our panelists want to jump in and say what their proudest story is?
I can jump in. It wasn't really a story, it was more so a campaign that I ran, but stories were told for it. So I don't know if it's gonna classify as a story, but I'm doing it anyway. But basically, Unite ran a campaign around the sexualization of queer women, as a queer woman myself, and feminine presenting, I guess. It was something that I deal with on a daily basis with my partner. And so I just kind of tested the water with the topic, created a campaign around it, but we reached 700,000 people organically through like no paid ads, nothing. It was just people solely sharing their stories around this topic, and social media kind of took it with it and it flew. And it was really interesting to hear queer women talking about their experiences and like uniting together around I just made my own pun, like, cause Unite, sorry. I just had to realize what I did. But yeah, it was really special to me because like it was something that I had dealt with on a daily basis, didn't know that so many people would relate to it, and then actually looking into the insights, it was something great, and it kind of made me realize that's where potentially queer women aren't seen in the media as much, and when these topics are spoken about, they really kind of grasp onto them, because I'll be honest, there's not a lot of like media sometimes around queer women, and so yeah, it was just a really special moment for not only myself but seeing queer women come together from in Australia to people in America, all come to collectively into one space. It was really special. Yeah.
No, it sounds really, really incredible. I mean, as a queer woman myself, I completely understand where you're coming from with that campaign. I've had experiences where I've been sexualized and experienced that with partners in the past. Will Unite run any campaigns in the future that are?
Yeah, so spoiler alert, that campaign is
exclusive.
Yeah, exclusive. But yeah, that campaign is coming back this year, but due to personal reasons, literally getting engaged, moving flat, just life, yeah, it's took a back burner, and obviously a pandemic, but the campaign will be relaunching. We've had an amazing lesbian artist from America create a piece around it, and we will be sending it, and all proceeds will be going to her, because something really important to myself is Unite is like a grassroots, so everything that we do, I want to make sure that I give back. I've never really took a penny from Unite, and so it's very much like I am doing this to boost the community as much as I can. So when the campaign launches, everything that we make, we either donate or give to creatives to make sure that they are sustainable, and that's just the way I think it should be. Well, like it should be from Unite's point of view, for sure. Yeah.
I'm sure many people would agree with that.
Thank you.
Cool. Jamie and Ryan, do you want to either of you jump in?
Do you want me to go first? Who are we going next?
You can go first, right?
Okay, can I cheat a little bit? Can I give 3 answers and I'll try and make them really quick?
I'll allow it. I'll allow it.
My very first journalism job, excuse me, sorry, my throat's a bit sore today. Back in 2008 was working for a local paper, the Echo, which I don't think exists anymore, but back in the day it was a daily local newspaper. And when I started there, I wasn't actually out at work. I mean, I think people who have worked in newsrooms in journalism know that it's, you know, especially back then, it wasn't always the friendliest place to be openly LGBTQ plus. But we had like the Toryest of Tory MPs in our local constituency. And it was around the time of like the same-sex marriage referendum. Was it that? Ireland was a referendum. It was the vote. And I just really kind of like got involved with reporting on that, because our MP at the time, great guy, he would write back to every constituent who asked him to vote in favor of same-sex marriage to say because it was against his Christian beliefs, he wouldn't be doing it. And so I kind of like did a lot of reporting around him. Didn't actually lead to anything. He still voted against it. I think the most I achieved was he wore a rainbow tie in the Commons once to try and kind of troll us all. But it was just kind of like, that led me to like coming out of work and like my path on like being focused on more LGBT issues. I worked at Gay Times for, excuse me, 4.5 years-ish. I was deputy editor there. And I remember we were about, I think, 4 or 5 days away from going to press with an issue. And the tragedy at Pulse in Orlando happened. And so we kind of basically just ripped up the entire issue and started again, and spent around the clock working for to produce kind of like a tribute issue and kind of like reflection and kind of like analysis of what happened there and how that tragedy, that shooting came to be. And yeah, like it took a lot of work and everyone came together, and we had kind of like message of support from like the Prime Minister at the time and like the Leader of the Opposition and like lots of like big political figures. And I think they now keep that copy of the magazine in a museum somewhere in Orlando, because it was like really yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was like something I'm really proud of. And more recently at Pink News, I'm trying to go through like all my career here. I realize I'm talking a lot as well, sorry. We just started a campaign to try and raise money for LGBTQ refugees. We launched it off the back of the crisis in Ukraine, but we were mindful of the fact that, you know, there's refugee crises going on all over. You know, there's still a lot of people who are suffering and affected by the in Afghanistan by what happened with the Taliban there. So we chose charities that would not just focus on the issue in Ukraine, but help LGBTQ people all over the world kind of get support, medication, like clothing, everything. So we kind of, that's an ongoing thing at the moment. We think we've raised about £12,000 so far from just doing like editorial and stuff. But yeah, it kind of feels like, I always like wanted to get into journalism for being like a force for good. So that kind of feels like the best example I can think of in terms of that. I'm gonna stop talking now, sorry. I'm gonna put a link into the campaign now.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we're just short of 12 grand, but like my aim is to raise 50 by I think next March. So I've got a bit of time left yet.
Cool. I mean, that's so many different things. I mean, the first thing you mentioned, I'm sure I've seen that on Twitter about that, the reporting you did on that MP. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to have to jump across to Jamie.
I talked for ages. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I kind of wish I'd gone first, because now all these amazing stories before me. I'm going to very quickly cheat too. I'll give you a journalism story and a podcast story inspired by Shivani, because I was digging for one and then I was like, obvious, I've got an obvious one. I did a piece of investigative journalism, like a series around chemsex. It was a really humbling series, amazing. I really enjoyed the approach we took, which was kind of putting people with lived experience first and letting them kind of guide the way we told the stories. One of my favorite parts about that was going to see the Met Police and sharing a lift with Cressida Dick, which was odd because she was wearing a jumper and trainers. And in that meeting, the police said, "Oh yeah, we've been reading your articles, and actually we've learned a lot more about chemsex thanks to them." And that was years before they apologized for the kind of Stephen Port letters. So that was really amazing. And then my cool, more Shivani and Charlotte story is that I was told early on in my career to stop pitching gay stories because there was no money or audience in them. And so I started a podcast, and funnily enough, built an international audience and a bunch of ad revenue. And I used that to relaunch Queer AF as an independent platform that's now commissioning kind of emerging queer creatives, and a similar kind of vibe to Unite, actually, and with a lot of inspiration from what you've been doing. And yeah, I'm really exciting. And we're open for pitches, and so that's the link I'm going to stick in a sec for our newsletter.
Cool. Sorry, I'm just some people are having trouble getting in the event, so I'm just shooting over a passcode to some people. Right, done.
I can fill for time if you want. I could talk about.
No, it's fine. It's all good. Technology. So I just wanted to, so the next area I wanted to cover is how has LGBTQ plus journalism changed in recent years. So obviously we can go through the huge history of LGBTQ plus journalism from sort of its hidden grassroots all the way through to, you know, digital first stuff and content that we have now. And I thought a really good speaker to lead on this would be Ryan, who obviously works for what is now the biggest LGBTQ plus publication in the world. So how do you think it's changed over the last couple of years? Has it become, obviously, as we know, more digital? How's that changed the storytelling and different things like that? If you could just take a lead on that, Ryan.
It's because I've been around for a long time. That's why you're picking on me first. I see. I just, in some ways, it has changed. But I think what's interesting to consider that in some ways it hasn't. And what I mean by that is, I just want to echo something that Jamie just said. You know, I've been in newsrooms in kind of like non-LGBTQ publications and been told to stop pitching so many gay ideas. Like, I don't know what constituted the ideas as being gay, but you know, I never complained about people's straight ideas. But I think, so what I mean by it, how has it changed in recent years? Maybe it hasn't. What I mean is that the importance of it hasn't changed. Like, there's still, you know, some of the most progressive newsrooms in the country will, you know, especially, you know, you just look at kind of like the situations at the BBC and the Guardian with trans issues, for example. Like, there's more importance for LGBTQ publications to tell LGBTQ stories than ever before, in my opinion. Simply because whether it's a combination of some places just aren't equipped to tell them properly, or some places just aren't interested or aren't bothered. But in those ways that it has changed, to go round about a little bit. I mean, it's the way that the journalism industry in general has changed, I think, has given more opportunity for LGBTQ stories to be told, because, you know, we can reach more people, we can reach more communities that are kind of all over the world. You know, we can kind of be better connected, and that allows us to tell stories more authentically, and it allows us to get those stories to more people. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I guess we'll jump across to Charlotte, who started a publication. You started yourself, online publication, so digital first. You know, in terms of how things have changed, did you look back at other LGBTQ plus publications from the past to think how you wanted to do Unite, or did you purposely want to do it digital first, very modern, very different? What was your thinking behind that?
Yeah, I wish there was some really good story behind this, but there really isn't. I come from a very like conservative small village, so I felt really alone, and I was getting into like the digital, like kind of social media marketing world. So I was just looking online and didn't feel like I could see some of the topics that I wanted to know the answers to being spoken about. So yeah, Unite Through the Years really changed. More so now I share more like newsy stories, I guess, with the coming out stories being the most prominent thing on Unite. But the reason why I did it was it was solely for my career at the start, to learn new skills. But through that, I've really learned the importance of, because Unite is more of a social media platform that first to like a website, a hosting service. So I've learned through social media how much it's changed, and I see places like Lad Bible now reporting on LGBTQ plus stories. The comments are an absolute mess, but they are still reporting on these stories. And previously, before, you wouldn't have seen that, and these topics wouldn't have been shown on there. So there's been a huge shift in what people consider newsworthy on like the mainstream platforms. And from working in that kind of viral social media space for a short time, I know how those stories get selected, and it's quite interesting to now see how LGBTQ plus stories are now being pushed into their realm, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a shift to these stories becoming much more mainstream on the regular. Shivani, obviously you work in radio and in broadcast, compared with, you know, people who come from more of a wordy background. Do you feel like there's a change in radio or television? Is it the same? Is it different? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there definitely is a change in radio. Like if you look to a few years ago, there was a radio station that launched called Hits Pride. One of the radio stations I work for is launching a pop-up radio station this summer called Virgin Radio Pride. There is this understanding coming from people that LGBTQ plus representation and LGBTQ plus stories are not necessarily represented well enough in this medium. And you know, just because it's an LGBTQ plus radio station that I work for, doesn't mean that we're just putting on a Kylie CD and all having a merry dance. We talk about everything from, you know, coming out stories to what you had for breakfast that day. Like it can be as random and as fluid as a non-specialist LGBTQ plus radio station. It just means that the people who are on that station and the thought that is going into that station is from a background that understands the struggles of the LGBTQ plus community and understands that we are a minority that is particularly targeted in the media. You know, Charles mentioned that on Lad Bible, you've got comments that are not very nice. If you started having conversations like we do on Virgin Radio Pride on something like BBC 5 Live, then you're going to get callers call in and say similar not very nice things. I think there are parts of the media now that are starting to realize that us as an audience and us as consumers of radio or news or print journalism, whatever it might be, need somewhere to go to get that reliable information and get that entertainment, get that lighthearted fun as well, that in a way that isn't going to also come with trauma if we're reading through the comments. And it's taken a long time to get there. There have been attempts at it in the past. There have been community radio stations and things like that in the past. A lot of those don't tend to make a huge amount of money or profit, and a lot of those don't pay their presenters because it's a community interest thing. It's more like voluntary work. But now that organizations are starting to put their money where their mouth is, which is nice to see.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, you know, it's really important to fund LGBTQ plus voices, and you know, people can't just live on exposure, which will bring me over to Jamie, who founded Queer AF to fund queer creatives in the media. Obviously you've set something up to specifically change the industry. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, basically, well, I spent a lot of time in journalism, and I realized that I got into it to change things. And for a lot of my career, I was kind of like playing the game, if you will, and for a lot of it serving kind of advertisers' needs, particularly in the kind of departments that I worked at and ran, was around kind of like video advertorial. And I guess I recognize that like it's really interesting. There's been a really big shift in kind of telling our stories, but I'm not sure we're always the ones telling it nowadays. I think nowadays there's lots of other people telling our story, and I'm not sure that's always a good thing. I kind of like look at Netflix as the kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly at the moment. You know, they can put out Heartstopper and Disclosure, and that's amazing. They can also repeatedly commission Chappelle and Ricky Gervais. And it's just so strange that these kind of like spaces are starting to recognize us, but also starting to kind of see the division that we are kind of useful for. And I guess like the reason I started Queer is that I really recognize that, like, you know, I talk about the kind of Harvey Milk Hope speech quite a lot, in the sense that like he spoke about that, you know, like the theme of it was, once you realize you're one of, one of us, you realize we're not like a monster. And I think that like the more we work in newsrooms, like across different types of newsrooms, not just kind of queer specific ones, the more chance we'll have the opportunity to kind of like change the norms that we all pull from the media. And that was kind of like the reason behind kind of like creating something that was about kind of nurturing talent. Equally, I wanted to be one of those journalists that didn't burn out by the time they were 30. And here I am at 29 having launched something, because I did. It's really tough. It's a really tough industry to work in. And yeah, I was exhausted after my stint, and I was like, right, how can I reinvest my like energy for stories? And it's by hopefully working with new and awesome folk.
Yeah, I really vibe with that about changing the sort of norms in newsrooms, and that's sort of the reason that I started the LGBTQ plus journalism network, is to obviously promote the voices of people and show why these voices are important in newsrooms around the country. So I really vibe with that. So to move on, the next area I wanted to cover was why these voices matter. Ironically enough, we're just discussing that, but you know, why is it important to tell these stories? From a personal perspective, I think LGBTQ plus stories are important, not just because, you know, they're a niche kind of news, they are local news. You know, if your local pride gets cancelled, that's a really important local story, and I think that story's worth telling. But why else do these things matter in wider societal context? Why are these stories worthy of being told, not just by LGBTQ plus publications, but the wider mainstream media? And I can open this one up to the panel if anyone wants to jump in first.
I can go if no one else minds.
Go ahead.
ILGA Europe, a human rights organization that every year they produce a ranking of the most LGBTQ friendly countries in Europe. And for 2022, the UK has slipped down to number 14. For context, in 2021, the UK was number 10. And in, I think, 2005, the UK was number 1. That can't all just be attributed to other countries doing better. LGBTQ rights are regressing in the UK. I think there's this, like, you know, especially, you know, among white cis gay men especially, there's this kind of, I think, you know, I think it kind of maybe comes, you kind of look at same-sex marriage and it's like, okay, well, that's a battle over now, that's a battle won. Like, you know, there's no way that like things are going to go backwards. You can't get the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube. But actually, you know, as we've seen in the last kind of few years, especially with attacks on trans and non-binary people, that's leading to like greater attacks on, you know, the LGBT community as well. Like, you know, things are going backwards. And the way that we kind of counter that is with robust, authentic LGBTQ plus journalism, telling stories authentically and kind of letting people have their voices be heard. So that's why I think LGBTQ voices matter in the media. And because we can't trust straight cis people to tell our stories because they just don't know how to do it properly. You know, I've seen so many kind of, I won't name names of publications, but I've seen so many stories, especially around trans issues, where it's just like, do you actually know what the Equality Act means? Like, you kind of like, I don't think you even know what this is. You know, and it's just down to, I think it's, yeah, it's kind of like we're getting into a bit of a crisis point. Not to be glum or dramatic, but sorry, again, I'm talking too much. Please, someone else jump in.
No, it's brilliant what you're saying, because it's really valid points. Yeah, the way that we have dropped down as a country is shocking, to say the least. And obviously that can be attributed to some of the narratives that are happening in the media. And obviously we're here to change. We're here to rewrite those narratives and tell better stories. Is anyone else want to jump in on the panel about this? Just a reminder to our audience as well that if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end.
I can quickly jump in on one
Yeah.
point. Through Unite, we've shared like around 60-70 coming out stories from people from different backgrounds, different spaces in the world and everything. And near enough every story, we normally just get one message, even if it's just one, saying this story really helped. And I think LGBTQ voices, even your own voice, sometimes you don't know the impact of it and what that can have. And through these coming out stories, people have felt so much more comfortable in themselves. And I think sharing just your journey and your experience, whether that just be on an Instagram post or on a full-fledged article, through those little articles have really helped people explore themselves. And I think it's something so important to always remember, that your voice always can have an impact. It doesn't matter how small or big, really.
Representation matters.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah, no, I can tell you there's been times, well, when I was younger and I saw just an Instagram post from a lesbian influencer, and it really mattered to me, especially when I was younger. And so I totally get where you're coming from. If anyone else wants to jump in, if not, we can move to our next area of discussion.
I think was the question, why does LGBTQ plus journalism matter?
So it's why do LGBTQ plus voices matter in the media, especially in 2022.
Yeah, I think why does the media matter at all is like your next logical question, right? So why bother with news at all? Why bother with reporting? It's to understand and learn about the experiences of what people are going through around the world, or even just down your road, and understanding that some of the trials and tribulations they're facing, or seeing something that uplifts spirits, makes you feel happy or emotive in some way. And if you're doing that for the straight cis community, then you are missing out a huge chunk of the population that have very real stories to be told, because journalism is about storytelling. It's factual storytelling, and it's important to make sure that those stories are told, because those are valid and real experiences within our society. If you're trying to portray what society looks like by printing a newspaper, for example, and you miss out completely one demographic of people, then you're not really giving a full picture of what that society looks like. And we saw what happened in the 80s when the media refused to I mean, it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It wasn't like the media all gathered together in a room and decided not to report on the HIV/AIDS crisis. But, you know, each newspaper and each news organization decided that it wasn't for them to cover the HIV/AIDS crisis. People having to get their information from all sorts of different places around the world to try and get any scrap of knowledge that they could. And if you've seen It's a Sin, you'll see a storyline reflecting that. And that, to a degree, is true. It did happen because the media here in the UK was not representing what was happening. And if they had informed and educated the public about what was going on within this community, it could have saved lives. And I'm not saying all of the stories that I do regarding the LGBTQ plus community will save lives, but that is the extreme of it.
No, definitely. I mean, It's a Sin's brilliant, the way that it represented that time period and really captured the kind of ambivalence of the media towards it. Jamie, do you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, I'd only build on what Shivani was saying there. Like, I think we're all being, quite careful about our words, right? Because we're journalists. So, like, I'll be bold here. Like, right now, hate crimes are up 210% in the last 6 years. There was 20,000 attacks in 2020, that year when most of us, spent it at home. Like, those headlines that say awful things about all of us, including, and specifically trans folk at the moment, they're leading to like real violence. Like, those headlines have actual blood on their hands. That's why this is a problem right now. And I think the thing that worries me the most as well is that I think a lot of the journalism that we all do and that the media does really focuses on the kind of what of the story. So we drive a lot of awareness, and what that often means is they use kind of really kind of dividing tactics. It's all us v them. It's all what they said and what they said. I think what we often forget to do is talk about the why of the story, like Joanna was talking about the broader picture at play, connecting those dots. Because what I find is like journalists also really rely on trauma, you know, to really drive their clicks at the moment. And it's exhausting. I think we're all exhausted by the trauma. And actually there's some really interesting science, right? When you read trauma, it switches you off. It puts you into like fight, flight, or freeze mode. It inspires like inertia. Whereas actually when you tell stories that like avoid trauma, you can actually like get the reader at home to inspire action. They get this fuller picture, they get to understand the next steps. And like, for me, that's why like us being in newsroom really matters, because by being there, we can provide the nuance and the broader take on our lives that's desperately needed in headlines that just pit us against everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed this when we've been working on our Journalists Like Us series, Jamie, about trauma. And I think there is definitely a trend that LGBTQ plus people who are commissioned to write stories in the media need to talk about their trauma, the things that they've gone through. And it's dark. It's a really dark trend, because we do have, you know, exceptionally normal lives, and our whole lives aren't trauma. And I think it is a worrying trend. I'm going to jump on to the next topic, because I'm just looking at time, and I do want to leave time for questions if there are any. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this event, a lot of the people who are going to be here today are either early career journalists or journalism students, people looking to get in the industry. So if you're looking to get into the industry and you want to specifically work in LGBTQ plus journalism, what skills do you need to harness and have? So what do you guys think? What skills should people be working on, trying to get experience in? What do you think are things that should be on their tick list? And this is open to the panel, so if anyone wants to jump in.
I can jump in if I can try and say something that sounds remotely intelligible, hopefully. I think the key to being a LGBTQ journalist, or a journalist who, you know, specifies in LGBTQ issues, is to be able to tell stories authentically. And so it's about being able to have that kind of like personable like connection with people, because I'm long been kind of like a believer that news is only kind of really useful if it's placed in like the context of like humanity, right? So we need to kind of like put the human side on things. And so I kind of like think the key is, you know, we can tell stories about kind of like we can tell like, you know, stories about kind of what's happening in kind of like a legislative sense, or we can tell stories about, you know, what's happening kind of like research and studies and that kind of thing. But it takes actually speaking to people and taking that information and getting like people's voices in to kind of really like frame that. But I think there's something that's really important as well, and it's like we need more LGBTQ journalists who are doing things in different arenas. And I think this is something that Shiv touched on when they started an intro. Like, they don't just do LGBTQ issues. I think, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, Shiv, but you mentioned like about doing more science and tech stuff as well. And I think it's just really important that we get LGBTQ people into other areas of journalism as well, whether that's science and tech, environment, culture, health, all that kind of thing, because we as a community factor into every single aspect of life. And we need to be kind of in those conversations in kind of major newsrooms where people are talking about like things that affect us, and without any kind of knowledge of our community, you know. So I think if you want to be in specifically to tell the stories of our community, then, you know, being able to speak to people and being able to kind of like, you know, bring their words to life and being able to kind of do their stories justice is really, really important. But we need to kind of look at getting people into more positions where questions like, or statements like, or people being told that their ideas are too gay don't happen anymore. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I think what we're kind of touching on then is that there needs to be a bit of an industry shift, that certain areas of journalism would be more accepting of people who are willing to tell LGBTQ plus stories in areas where they traditionally perhaps haven't, as we mentioned, like technology, science, environmental journalism, perhaps, I don't know.
It's a very, very, very kind of horrible industry, really, isn't it? Like, it's all just like majoritively white, straight, cis men. Like, you know, I say that with like quite a huge degree of privilege myself, but you know, the only way that that journalism is going to improve is if the people who are the journalists are better reflective of society, of the stories, you know.
Definitely.
What's going on there?
Yeah, but Ryan, at least journalism makes us really, really rich.
Thanks, I needed that.
I think to expand on what you were saying though, with any area of journalism that you go into, whether that is telling the stories of the LGBTQ plus community or science, technology, environment, health, I'm just listing ones that I do. There are others, sport, whatever it might be, then you need to be able to tell a story, and you need to be able to understand why that story is important. Why would anybody want to click on that? And if it's just one person who would want to click on that, that's still a really valid story, but you need to be able to get the story told in a way that people are going to engage with it and understand what you're trying to tell them. So whether that's your writing skills or your broadcasting, speaking skills, it's really important to work on that. It's incredibly important to be able to have contacts and speak to people about the things that might turn into a story. You have no idea the amount of times I've been told to shut up at a dinner party because I'm like, that's an injustice and we should be reporting that. And people are like, no, my boss is just an arsehole. All bosses are an arsehole. It's not like, sorry, can I say that word? It's not, it's not a news story. Everyone knows this.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to work out what a story is and how to tell it. And often when it comes to telling stories from the LGBTQ plus community, you may or you may not have shared experiences or come from similar demographics, similar backgrounds. You might be a cis straight man, but you might have a different ethnic identity. And you need to understand that all of these things play a part in that person's experience. And so you might have a similar reason, but you also need to, a similar experience, but you also need to hear what they are saying and where they are coming from in order to be able to tell that story in the most well-rounded, nuanced way, because our lives, if nothing else, are extremely nuanced.
Yeah, definitely.
And to build on that, like my actionable tip was like, so like journalists have to pretend that we're an expert in everything, right? That's how we get through our careers, by pretending we know things when we really don't. Like, and so some of the best stories I've told is where I've like, it goes against the grain to this, but like where I've handed control over, and so even sometimes even sent like the full copy of the story to the person with the lived experience and gone, is this right? Have I covered it right? Like what would you change? What that delivers is so much better. I wish I'd always been in a like position at the organization I worked at, have a budget to pay people to just do that on their own. But like, so if you don't have that, like hand some of that control over, you'd be amazed at how much better your story gets, how much better it lands with the audience that you're trying to reach, and also how much better the impact of your story is. It allows you to kind of match the intention that you have to the impact you actually will end up delivering. Yeah.
I think that definitely links back to what we were saying about having to be the expert in every single topic. And there's been quite a few times I've had phone interviews and I've had to say, like, I need you to explain this to me as if I know nothing, because secretly I don't. But, you know, I've had to just say, you know, you need to be clear. And I think journalists need to not be afraid to do that, to learn as we go as well. Charlotte, do you have anything to add at all?
Not really, no. I was like, I wouldn't classify myself as a journalist. I'm more like a social media kind of queen. But from my point of view, everything that I've done is something that I've learned along the way. I've never so my whole career basically is I've just gone and done it. And, you know, I had no idea how to create a website, how to create social platforms, how to even write an article. If you look at Unite's first articles, they're horrendous. But kind of just going out and doing it. And I know you can't make a career off that, but I've somehow windled my way into places. So kind of just never be scared of what's coming. And I guess that's general advice, but in an industry where is very competitive, I don't think you should have the mindset someone's better than you. Not that I'm saying that I'm the best, but just always say like you have something to add into every conversation, really.
Brilliant. I mean, social media is one that I think all budding journalists should familiarise themselves with. Every single social platform and how to utilise it to tell a story. I work as a digital reporter, so digital first is the way the world is going, and social media is going to become more and more of an important factor to telling stories and reaching audiences as time goes on. So I think it's really important for young journalists to familiarise themselves with those platforms. And then I'm going to jump onto the final topic, and then we'll have some time for some questions. If, as I say, people will drop them into the chat. So this is kind of related to the one we've just been talking about, but it's slightly different. So if someone's looking to get into LGBTQ plus journalism, what steps should they take? So we've discussed skills and things like that you should get, but what active steps? So what experiences should you be trying to get? I mean, I can talk from experience that I worked for no money for so many places just to get things on my CV, which of course isn't always the way, but that's what I did personally. I did a 2-week work placement with Diva magazine. I did freelancing for different places, got some bylines, and then did my NCTJ, which obviously massively helped. But what advice do anyone on the panel have about steps you should be taking to get into this area of journalism?
I would say you can do it yourself. So you could start a blog, and that's a specific type of journalism. That's your own sort of first person narrative, lived experience journalism. That's not necessarily going to get you a byline on any major news website if that's the kind of thing that you want immediately, but it will hone your writing skills, and it will teach you how to write, and write in a way that's entertaining and informative. Or you could do similar things to what you see news platforms doing. Like I work for a news platform on TikTok called Openly News, and we tell the news on TikTok. So if you're great at TikTok, or you want to get on TikTok, you can use platforms like that to start to tell stories and hone your craft. Obviously those things aren't going to get you paid. There are so many internships available where you can apply. I applied for like 50 internships and got one, or trainee schemes and got one, and it's all you need. You just need that one that is going to get you into the media industry, get you that email address, and then fire off loads of emails and say, hey, I'm in this building with you, can I do something with you? Which is basically what I've done to move around in my career from different departments and in different mediums. I would also say that freelancers make a living from essentially not having a job. They make a living by pitching to a number of outlets, lots of outlets. Most outlets will allow you to pitch to them as a freelancer, and that just, you go on their website, you type in whatever paper it is or whatever website it is, and pitching guidelines or whatever, and most of them will have guidance on how you can pitch to them, how you can get your story to them, and if they like it, they will get back to you and say, yeah, give me 800 words on this, or whatever it might be. One of the key things, though, I think that nobody really mentions ever, is try and find yourself a mentor. Find somebody who has the experience and the time to be able to help guide you through this hellscape of an industry, because as we've, I think, all mentioned now, it can be really tough, and sometimes all you need is one person to just say, actually, what you're doing is, don't pitch to someone in their Twitter DMs, you need to write them an email, and this is how you lay out a pitch, for example. The way you get a mentor is varied. You can go up to people and ask them if you work in an office with other people whose careers you want to follow, or you can follow journalists that you admire on social media and like their tweets, or email them and DM them and try and build a relationship with them, ask them out for a coffee, just to sort of say, I admire your work, I'd really love to know more about what you do, and then build a relationship with them, and then drop in the big, will you be my mentor? It's almost as pressurizing as proposing to somebody, but it can be invaluable.
Brilliant. That's an absolute, just like smashed all the things everyone should do. I'm really conscious of the time, so I won't jump to the rest of the panel, but honestly, you just absolutely covered everything everyone should do, Shivani. So I'm going to just jump to the questions because I do want to get through some of them. So this is a general question to the whole panel from Andrew Colley. And the question is, what can mainstream media organisations do to try and improve representation within the newsroom? How can those companies, either regional or national, work better with the next generation of journalists / students looking for their first opportunity in the media, but fear some of the issues being discussed tonight? So what do you guys think?
There is rarely a silver bullet in anything, but when it comes to getting representation right in the newsroom, hire us. That's what they need to do. That's all they need to do. They just need to bring us into the room.
Brilliant.
I won't answer the other question. That's my take.
That is the answer. That's nailed on. But the problem is that newsrooms need to be more proactive to hire us, because we are harder to hire because we don't get the same opportunities. So that requires working with, you know, universities, like training courses, working with LGBTQ groups to like try and like find us and identify us, because you know, there's so many different studies out there that tell us that, you know, it's really harder for us in like pretty much every single possible workplace. It just takes people to take a proactive approach to kind of get us, and that's the same for any kind of improving representation and diversity from all kinds of angles, isn't it? Like you need to actually make the concerted effort to kind of make sure you've got shortlists that are diverse and interview processes that are welcoming and that kind of thing.
And they can support their LGBTQ plus journalists as well. So if, you know, there's homophobic language being used in the office or transphobic language being used in the office, they can shut that down and make sure there's sort of a zero tolerance rule on that kind of stuff, rather than making someone who is LGBTQ plus work in a hostile workforce and then quit their job and move to somewhere else.
Takes work, basically.
Yeah, you need to create an environment that's safe and that will in itself encourage people from diverse backgrounds is my take on that. So the next question we have from Emma. So for the whole panel, what do you all think the future of LGBTQ plus journalism is? Do you think we'll see a further shift of this type of journalism to the mainstream, or do you think it will still be its own niche?
Talking from like a social media point of view, yeah, I've seen a lot more pages cover LGBTQ plus topics. Platforms are doing them not maybe as full articles, but just social little bits on social media like quick news. And yeah, I've seen a real shift in the last year or two of these platforms starting to report on them. I don't know if they're seeing the success of like platforms such as Pink News and thinking, oh, that's somewhere we can get involved with. But yeah, I've seen a real shift in it, and from working from a big platform, they wanted me to start getting more involved in those kind of stories. So yeah, I think there's going to be a real big shift into what stories they bring into their realm and what they deem as newsy, I guess.
Yeah, I kind of find it hard to think about the future of journalism in general. Like, you know, when I first started, there wasn't even Twitter, let alone things like Snapchat and TikTok. I sound ancient, I'm so sorry. But one thing that I think is kind of worth thinking about or considering is that mainstream media need to be telling our stories for the right reasons, and not just because they think they're going to get like rage clicks or loads of angry comments on Facebook and that kind of thing, and they're just kind of using us to kind of drum up like, you know, like shallow web traffic. That you know, if kind of there's going to be a shift to the mainstream telling our stories, it needs to be because they want to tell our stories, not because they want to like capitalize on like you know, creating toxic narratives just for their own kind of engagement and gain.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's this danger that telling these stories that can be quite contentious can just lead to, yeah, as you mentioned, like hate clicks, which kind of defeats the point of telling the stories in the first place almost.
So it's like loads, especially with like the Olympics and Laurel Hubbard. It's like loads of like publications just suddenly were really interested in the sporting career of Laurel Hubbard, where they'd never covered like trans athletes or the Olympics or anything before, and they just knew it's just because they were going to get people.
Yeah.
It was a hot topic, and it was just kind of like taking advantage of a thing, and it wasn't done delicately or properly. It was like done for wrong reasons, and you could kind of tell.
Yeah.
I think it's because they're like completely hooked on like short-term revenue-led incentives, right? And so like that's what I'm betting on with Queer AF, is that actually like I think we'll see like a diversification. I think nicheification in the media is gonna happen. We've seen Substack go humongous, right? That's because people are reaching out and they're forming communities around like smaller topics. I think that's really like interesting. Like our bet is like a community of people that want to support queer creatives and that are interested in like crowd. We basically, the way our editorial approach is like we crowdsource it. So like I'm not in charge of it. Like the people that pay for it, they say what we should cover, and then if we don't deliver for them, then they're not going to come back. And like I think putting the audience in control is going to be like something that we've seen lots of other independent media organizations in the US and the UK do, and I think that that's only going to grow.
Right, we'll jump on to the very last question, and then we'll round the event off. So this last question is from Paul, and Paul asks, in which arenas do you find other LGBTQ plus professionals to collaborate with? So Paul is Norwegian, a gay podcast sound designer, and would love to find other podcast creators to work on LGBTQ plus projects with. So I guess this question comes down to how can you network with in order to find other journalists who are interested in similar things. If anyone has any websites or ways people can find others to work with.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking specifically within podcasting and you want to work with people in the UK, there are loads of UK sort of groups. One that is really good, it's not specifically LGBTQ plus, but it's very LGBTQ plus friendly, is UK Audio Network, which does a lot of posts a lot about jobs. It posts stuff about like let's have a meetup and get to know each other kind of things. There is the Queer Podcasters Network as well, which I think went on a bit of a hiatus during the pandemic because the person running it obviously was experiencing a pandemic and needed to take a break for their own mental health. But that's up and running now again, I think. And online is a really great place. Like if you like somebody's work and they're the kind of person that you want to work with, I would just reach out to them and say, hey, I loved your thing. Let's get a coffee, or like just I loved your thing. And then they'll probably reply with like, oh, thanks so much. And you know, you kind of form a relationship with them that way. But also I am a queer podcaster. I've just created my own production company to make more podcasts. We need sound designers, so hey, let's have a chat.
Cool. If you want to drop your details in the chat, just so people who want to get in touch can do, but obviously all our speakers are on social media as well, easily to connect with them. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm just going to quickly round off in the last minute. So thank you to all of our speakers today for being here at our very first event, which I think has been really great success, really great information, really insightful opinions from all of our speakers. Of course, thank you to NewsQuest for sponsoring this event. It wouldn't have happened without them being able to do that. Of course, I want to plug the LGBTQ plus journalism network, which if you're not already a member of the group, please do join. We have opportunities, commissions people can do, ways for people to network and connect with each other, as something Paul was after. It's all there, and we have a website now on social media, so please connect with us. But yes, thank you so very much for everyone coming tonight. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday and a lovely rest of your weekend.